I am the editor of a website called KurdishQuestion.com. Daily news and political, theoretical, philosophical discussions about the Kurdish movement. I also sometimes come to events like this on behalf of the Kurdish Peoples Assembly, which is an assembly based in the UK, but has models and similar organisations all over Europe and indeed in Kurdistan and the region itself. I'd like to begin by talking about the Kurdish movement, by which I mean the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which was officially formed in 1978 in a village in North Kurdistan, which officially is Turkey. It's from the beginning, its natural leader was Abdullah Öcalan, who you probably heard about. He's been on an island prison in Turkey for 16 years in solitary confinement. At the moment, there's a kind of stop-start, rough peace process going on with the Turkish state for the resolution of the Kurdish question in Turkey. So he's a political, theoretical, philosophical leader for the Kurdish people. Today I'm going to be talking about his ideological advancement or contribution to the Kurdish question and to the Kurdish struggle, but also to international revolution, or the revolution specifically in Kurdistan and the Middle East. So the PKK was formed in 1978 during the Cold War. It was a Cold War period. It was ideologically influenced by the Turkish left, which was influenced by Marxist-Leninist literature, together with national liberation. Obviously, with Marxism-Leninism being a product of modernity, or coming together at the same time as modernity was starting to develop, especially in the West, there was a very absolute approach to everything, all the concepts, all the realities of the Middle East and the Kurdish question. So the concept of revolution or democracy was very absolute. The whole aim of the struggle at the beginning, right from the beginning, was to create a unified socialist republic of Kurdistan in the four parts of Kurdistan, which is Turkey, Iraq, Iran and Syria, where about 40 million Kurds live. Over the years, and as in the 80s the Soviet Union began playing a, let's say, counter-revolutionary role around the world, that had started earlier, but it began to become more clear. All the leftist movements, all the socialist, communist, revolutionary movements kind of went into an impasse, really, a cul-de-sac which they couldn't come out of. And the PKK was one of these organizations. The war became very bloody in the 80s and early 90s. It became a very dirty war for both sides. And ideologically, the PKK had to find a way of overcoming, surpassing its absolutist Marxist-Leninist approach and political theory to the world, which was very top-down, very authoritarian in places, and had a militarizing effect on the Kurdish population in general. Some might say, and I believe this, that was a necessary development, it was a necessary process, period, and the PKK sees it as such in the context that they had to fire a bullet into the head of the Kurdish people themselves to wake them up. It's very Fanonian, if you will, the first bullet theory at your enemy, but also at yourself, to wake you up from the slumber that you're in. And not just because the Kurdish people were suffering on a national level, but also because, just like with any other colonizing force, they were also becoming the most oppressed, most reactionary, most regressive elements of society in Turkey as well, especially Turkey. The Kurds were becoming this. They were becoming cheap labor for the work market. They were, because of a lack of national identity, were not able to develop any democratization within Kurdish society itself, especially in the body of women, let's say, or the reality of women. So in the late 80s and early 90s, Öcalan reappraised his approach to gender and his approach to women, his approach to religion. What would a revolutionary approach to gender and a revolutionary approach, especially to religion, what would that be? And sociology began to take a front seat in his approach, approaching things in their historical context and not approaching them in an absolutist and very modernist way. So in fact, whilst becoming more local, he was also becoming more universal in his approach to these concepts. During the 90s, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, in 1995, the PKK had a congress, and they took symbolically is it called the scythe and the hammer, or the sickle and the hammer, from their flag, from their logo, and they began to enter a phase of questing after a new approach, which would democratize society and be able to bring about a political and peaceful solution to the Kurdish question, basically, because the war had reached kind of deadlock. It had become evident that the Turkish state were not going to defeat the PKK, but that the PKK were also not going to be able to defeat the Turkish state. So from 1993 onwards, the PKK have declared 9 unilateral ceasefires. One is now ongoing. From 1993 to 1999, Öcalan began developing new theories. He began reading Immanuel Wallerstein, for example. He began reading Adorno. He began reading Bookchin. He comes a bit later. Who was the Italian prison writings? Gramsci. And looking at their approaches to hegemony, looking at their approaches to hierarchy, looking at their approaches to how democracy could be re-evaluated, reformulated. He also began looking at the Middle East and Kurdistan itself, and the civilizations and the states, and the kingdoms, the struggles that had developed in the region itself, and from which the PKK, or the contemporary Kurdish movement, had actually taken a lot of its codes from during its formation, just naturally because they were from that region. After his capture in 1999, this took on a whole different level. He began really trying harder because he had been removed from the war. He had stopped being the commander-in-chief, really, of the war. He began to have a space to write 10 books, the last of which is the Democratic Modernity Manifesto. The first volume is coming out next month. And he began to read, especially Bookchin, Murray Bookchin, began to look at social ecology. He began to reappraise anarchism, the popular revolts, which before had been seen as being reactionary or being seen as being feudal. He began to look at women's movements. He began to look at religion and how this had had a positive effect, in fact, because Marxist-Leninism saw all this as being reactionary, as backwards, or as not modern, or not in line with the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And he came up with the idea of democratic autonomy within democratic confederalism, which would surpass the nation state, which had caused a lot of bloodshed, a lot of war, and a lot of nationalisms in the Middle East. And he said we can replace the nation state with democratic confederalism, made up of autonomies at the local level in all the countries within the Middle East, which could lift the borders. He likened it a little bit to the EU, if you will. Not that that's not having its problems now. He said that we needed to replace capitalism with communalism, a communal economy. And he said we needed to replace capitalist industry with ecological industry. So these are the 3 tenets which come out of all of this, 16 years of reading and writing, basically. So his proposal for a solution to the Kurdish question, but a solution to all the questions in the Middle East at the moment is democratic autonomy under the umbrella of democratic confederalism. So the KCK system, the Kurdistan Communities Union system, which the PKK have set up as a system for all parts of Kurdistan, is a unification, basically, of hundreds, if not thousands, of cooperatives, communes, people's assemblies, from street level, from neighborhood level to the highest level, to the national level, basically. And this is being implemented now in Rojava for the last 3 years, since 4 years, since 2011, when the Syrian civil war occurred. There was a vacuum that needed to be filled in northern Syria. The Kurds and the party who are aligned ideologically with the PKK, who see Öcalan as their leader, created popular assemblies immediately as Assad withdrew his forces. There was very little fighting for the first year because forces like al-Nusra and then ISIS had not developed then. The Free Syrian Army tried to hijack, if you will, those administrations, and some other Kurdish parties colluded with them in trying to do this, but the people were strong because there was strong leadership, and the people began to trust in the PYD, the Democratic Union Party, which is doing this there, and TEVDEM, the Democratic Society Congress, which is kind of the umbrella organization, because they saw that they could protect them, their security, their safety, but they also saw that they could run factories and run bakeries and run the oil refineries. And these were all run with the people. So the people were not left outside. The people were not, it wasn't, we're going to do this for the people, we're going to do this with the people. And this is ongoing now. There's 3 cantons. Kobani is the one in the middle, which has been in the news for a very long time. There's Afrin on the left of it and Jazeera on the right of it. In total, about 3 to 4 million people live in these cantons. There are, as I said, Kurds, the majority, Assyrians, Christian Assyrians, Armenians, Arabs, Turkmen, and there's a charter, basically, whereby all of the rights and all of the identities, languages, religious beliefs, or philosophies, any sort of belief, are protected by this charter, basically, the Rojava Charter, which you can find on Kurdish Question. It's a very, very interesting document. I'd suggest you have a look at it. So for the first time, maybe in the Middle East, in the modern era actually, there's a system, an administration, which involves basically every single citizen which agrees to this charter to be a part of running this administration. So as I mentioned, there are, for example, cooperatives, women's cooperatives, only women's cooperatives, aimed at creating women's economy, so that women are not at the mercy of the men. Every single organization has a co-chair system whereby it's a man and a woman. There is no such thing as minorities. The Arabs, even let's say if the Arab community make up 5% of the population, they still have an equal share of the administration and representatives in the parliaments, in the committees that they're in, to anybody else, even if let's say the Kurds have 98%. So the concept of minority majority is completely eradicated. There are quotas for women, but because because of the co-chair system, there's also a 40% quota, but women have to be a part of an organization. This isn't just also for show as well. It's because there's the belief that women actually represent a different perspective on the world because of their history, because of being women, because of their biology, because of their gender, that every decision which is taken by a man and a woman is more healthier, not just because there's 2 people, but also because there's a woman, and a woman, in most cases, will think differently to a man. That's another whole different topic. So security is carried out by the people. There is an Asayish, a security service, a security force, but also every single citizen is trained for 6 weeks, so that eventually there is not going to be any need. There's a view to getting rid of any security. And interestingly, and David Graeber speaks about this in one of his videos on YouTube, they are trying to form a dual power, basically, at the same time. So they're trying to form a state-like structure, which isn't a state, but also the same people are forming a popular people's power, basically, which keeps the state in check and is much stronger than the state, and is much more rooted in the communities and within the people. And he gives the reason, and it's true, because the world is still run on a state or nation-state level, or with that mentality. For Rojava to be accepted, or at least recognized in the near future, it must have something that seems or looks similar to what we would in the West call a state, or a prime minister. So there are all these titles and all these statuses as well, but actually in reality they don't mean very much, in the sense that, you know, these people aren't any different to anybody else. They live in the same conditions, and they have to work harder than everybody else, and they have to directly are accountable to the people, because the structures at the bottom are much stronger than the structures at the top. So there's a revolution, ongoing revolution, which is trying to resolve the Kurdish national question and the national question of a lot of the minorities, the smaller religious and ethnic groups in the region. But there's also a serious revolution to develop gender equality, to develop a different type of education. We haven't spoken about education. To develop a society without hierarchies, or that weaken hierarchies on a day-to-day, second, minute-to-minute basis, basically. That get rid of the absolutes that have been created, especially in the Middle East. Some things that seem normal to us or that seem to be overcome in the West are still very much deeply rooted in the Middle East, especially the gender issue. But these are all trying to be overcome in a revolutionary and evolutionary manner. And they're trying to be overcome by people who are sometimes, you know, not very educated, let's say, in this academic way. Who don't know these concepts but are experiencing them firsthand, who are in this day-to-day struggle. And they're creating this. They're creating a new life, a new way of seeing things, a new way of doing things. And you go there, I was at the border a few months ago, and there's no such thing as impossible for them, because they've seen the worst. They've seen war, they've been face to face with, you know, jihadi terrorists or whatever, I don't know what to call them, you know, monsters basically. And they feel like they have so much more hope than me, for example, in that they can succeed in this. And if not, if the revolution is hijacked, or if the revolution is stopped short of achieving all its aims, then at least it's so much more progressive than anything else in the Middle East. It's so much more progressive than anything else in the Middle East. So the relevancy of it to here is that we know that now, with what's happening in Yemen as well, we know that our country here, our government here, is involved up to their necks in the Middle East in a reactionary way. They're playing a reactionary role. So how can we get our own governments to play a positive role, to play a role for democracy? And how can we learn and teach these movements, or the Kurdish movement especially, in the Middle East, develop solidarity, go there, visit, see what they're doing, and also maybe come and implement it here, or take what we know from here and implement it there, because they need a lot of help as well. If the capitalist imperialist system is global, then the resistance against that has to be global as well. And I think that this is a historical moment where, even if the capitalist system isn't defeated, with the struggle that we give all over the world, it's going to have to change shape. It's going to have to evolve into something that is more humane, more sustainable for the environment, for human, for human beings. It's not going to create cancer and hegemony and hierarchies everywhere it goes. So I think it's very, very relevant. It's very relevant, at least for, I'd like to kind of pay tribute to him here, Konstantinos Eric Skirfield, who went out there, British a man who went out there and gave up his life, just like a lot of British people and people from around the world went to fight in the Spanish Civil War. So there's a whole internationalist aspect to it as well, and it's not so far away from us, because I think, ISIS, whoever's toy it is, whoever's Frankenstein it is, can rear its head easily anywhere in the world. And if that doesn't, it'll be a different organization which has similar aims and similar tactics. So develop solidarity with the Kurdish movement, and we want to develop solidarity because I pay a lot of importance to what the assemblies are trying to do here, and I think it is the way forward in creating a people's democracy where we can decide what we want for our own futures and our own lives.
I'm doing actually my dissertation on libertarian municipalism and how it can be libertarian municipalism, which is the kind of theory that has kind of been derived from Murray Bookchin and is kind of being implemented now. And it's kind of looking at ways at how that theory can replace capitalism. And obviously what you're saying is loads of cooperatives have been set up. What I'm kind of wanting to ask is, obviously a kind of more social and moral economy is kind of forming, but do you still find that they're still using the market as a means to kind of exchange their goods, and they're still having to be dependent on buying the resources from outside, which are still very much dependent on a fluctuating market? Obviously what Murray Bookchin says is these cooperatives turn into kind of worker capitalists, obviously following what's happening with the is it New Compass? The New Compass group, talking about the kind of success of it. I was wondering what your thoughts are on this kind of method being, for example, implemented here. Surely cooperatives are still kind of using the market, they're still using wage labour, and I'm not saying, I'm asking for revolution, I just kind of want to know what your opinion would be of maybe how they're approaching that, approaching wage labour, approaching, cooperative businesses basically, and how that's still kind of form capital.
There's a war economy still in Rojava. I think there's a few different types of economy being used. One of them is the central Syrian economy. So the Assad regime is still paying some of the people who are working as civil servants in the area, but they're doing that for all of the regions. So they're not just doing it for the Kurdish region. They're doing it even for Raqqa, for example, which is in the hands of ISIS. So there is that. It's very limited. There is a bartering. So there is, certain cantons have. One of them is quite rich in olives. Another one has oil. So there's a barter economy going on from what we know. And at the root of the Kurdish or this revolution that we're proposing is also a return to agricultural means, an agricultural revolution, basically. Just like the Neolithic revolution thousands of years ago was an agricultural revolution, back to the land. I mean, that's not to say, to regress, but morality, culture, ethics also derives from there, from the land. So it's a more of a developing a new way of living. So there's that which is trying to be developed. I agree with what you're saying. We do believe in that cooperatives can lead, have that danger, but because we are not approaching the issue in an absolute way anymore, there is no one right way, basically. There may be more, and you can only try them in their plurality to see which one works better. But because there's an ongoing war, there's an embargo from the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq, northern Iraq, There's an embargo on the Turkish side. So not a lot of aid is getting in from international organizations as well. But people are still surviving, and they're surviving because they're still, you know, they're tied to the land, basically. So after the war, let's say in the next 5, 10, 15 years, I think some capitalism is going to get in there as well. I don't think, you know, because we're not completely saying, okay, we're done with capitalism or capitalist modes of production, or the technology that capitalism creates. It's not going to be black and white, and I don't think it's going to be like that anywhere. And when revolutionaries or people who are looking for alternatives do take that approach, you end up losing. You end up
civil war.
Yeah, you end up not being in the struggle for the long term. You need to see, you know, there is pragmatic politics, there is realpolitik, and you have an enemy or you have an adversary who you're trying to, and we believe this as well, we believe that we can try and change our adversaries and try to make them do good things in the Middle East as well. So it's not like we're against America, we're against Britain, because we always differentiate between the states and the people as well. And you know, modern science or theories have usually united the state, and as if the state and the people were the same thing. So we're being very, and it's difficult sometimes for people who don't understand, or who are non-Kurdish, let's say, to understand the Kurdish movement from within, because everyone's trying to kind of impose their own structures of understanding these concepts and these theories onto the movement, but trying to see them from within, you see how much more complicated and difficult it is.
Thank you.
Okay.